3 weeks before Veronica Palmer marries one of America's wealthiest men, she sits alone in her River North design office, staring at her wedding guest list. The cream cardstock invitations, gold foil lettering, hand-pressed edges, have already gone out to 400 names. Business moguls, tech founders, family members who watched her struggle through the hardest years of her life. But there's one name missing. Her fingers hover over the keyboard. She types slowly, deliberately, Griffin Caldwell. Her assistant gasps from across the room. "Is that?" "My ex-fiancé," Veronica confirms. The twins' biological father, the man who abandoned her pregnant, the man who handed her a check for $50,000 and told her she wasn't sophisticated enough for his world. The man who called her just a pretty face and said they were never equals. Some women want revenge. Veronica Palmer wanted something better, a front-row seat to his regret. So why would a successful entrepreneur about to marry a $3.7 billion venture capitalist invite the ex who shattered her heart and walked away from his own children? Before we reveal what happened at that wedding, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. This story proves that the best revenge isn't anger, it's evolution. Hit that like button if you're ready to see how Veronica transformed from abandoned and pregnant to unstoppable and thriving. And subscribe to the Penthouse Diaries because stories like this, where strength wins and grace becomes power, are exactly what we're building here. Now let's go back to where it all started. Back to the gray November day when Veronica's entire world split into before and after. Back to the moment she discovered she was carrying twins and made the mistake of believing the man she loved would be happy about it. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. November in Chicago meant gray skies and wet streets, but this felt different, heavier, like the city itself was holding its breath. Veronica sat in Dr. Hayes's examination room, staring at the ultrasound screen, while 2 tiny heartbeats pulsed against the black background. 12 weeks, Dr. Hayes confirmed, pointing to the flickering lights. "And it's twins. Congratulations. Twins." Veronica's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. Beneath her coat and sweater, her body was already changing, nurturing 2 lives she hadn't planned for but somehow already loved. The engagement ring on her left hand caught the fluorescent lighting, its diamond reflecting small bursts of white across the examination room walls. Griffin had proposed 6 months ago with this ring. In 6 more weeks, they were supposed to get married at his family's Lake Forest estate, but first, she had to tell him about the babies. She thought back to how they'd met 3 years earlier at an upscale gallery opening in the West Loop. Veronica had been hired to serve champagne that night, working her way through design school 1 catering gig at a time. Griffin Caldwell walked in wearing a suit that probably cost more than her entire semester's tuition. He'd noticed her sketching during her break, asked about her portfolio, complimented her vision. "You're going to do incredible things," he'd told her that night. He'd asked for her number, called the next day, took her to dinner at restaurants where she couldn't pronounce half the menu, introduced her to his world, country clubs, charity galas, weekend trips to his parents' summer home in Door County. His mother had been polite but distant, always mentioning women with names like Penelope Ashford or the Carmichael twins, women who came from money, who understood Griffin's world in ways Veronica was still learning. But Griffin had assured her none of that mattered. He loved her. He wanted to marry her. The engagement photos still hung in gilded frames at his parents' house. Veronica in borrowed couture gowns that his mother's stylist had selected. Griffin in custom suits standing beside her, both of them smiling for the camera. The wedding invitations had already been ordered, thick cardstock with elegant script announcing their union. Everything had been perfect. Until now. Veronica left the clinic and sat in her car for nearly an hour, hands gripping the steering wheel, while rain hammered against the windshield. She watched people hurry past with umbrellas, their lives continuing normally while hers shifted on its axis. Excitement warred with fear in her chest. She wanted these babies. Desperately. But what if Griffin didn't? What if the timing was wrong? What if he wasn't ready? What if... She forced herself to stop. Griffin loved her. He'd said so 1,000 times. Yes, this would complicate their plans, but they'd figure it out together. That's what couples did. That's what families did. The next morning, Veronica drove downtown to Griffin's office in the historic Rookery building. She rehearsed what she'd say during the entire drive, how she'd frame the news, how she'd remind him that they were in this together, how she'd paint a picture of their future with 2 beautiful children. She had no idea she was driving toward the worst conversation of her life. Caldwell Industries occupied 3 floors of the historic Rookery building, all marble columns and mahogany paneling that screamed old money. Veronica rode the elevator up, watching the floors tick by while her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. She had the words ready. Griffin's assistant waved her through with a warm smile. "He's expecting you. Go right in." Except he wasn't expecting her. Not really. Not for this. Griffin stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, phone pressed to his ear, already deep into his morning calls. When he finally turned around, Veronica's carefully prepared speech vanished. "I need to tell you something important." Griffin glanced at his Rolex. "Can it wait?" "The hedge fund team arrives in 20 minutes. I'm pregnant." The words came out flat, simple. 12 weeks. It's twins. Silence. Outside, Chicago continued its morning rhythm. Taxis honking, pedestrians rushing to work, the world spinning forward. Inside that office, time froze. Griffin set down his phone with mechanical precision. "That's not possible. We've been careful." Apparently not careful enough. He walked to his desk, fingers drumming against the polished surface. Veronica had always found that habit endearing, this nervous tick that made him human. Until this moment. "This changes everything, Veronica. The timing is terrible. My father's announcing my promotion to VP next month. The Hastings merger is in final negotiations. I know the timing isn't ideal." "Ideal?" His laugh held no warmth. "This is a disaster. My mother's already planning the wedding. What am I supposed to tell her? That we need to rush everything because you got pregnant?" The way he said it, "you got pregnant," as if she'd managed it alone. "Griffin, these are our children. Don't you care about that?" He studied her then with an expression she'd never seen before. His gaze traveled from her face downward and back up again, lingering in ways that made her stomach turn. "You know what I think?" His voice dropped low, almost cruel. "I think you did this on purpose. Trap the rich guy before he figures out what you really are." Veronica's breath caught. "That's not fair. That's not true. Isn't it?" Griffin moved closer, his presence suddenly oppressive. "Let's be honest, Ronnie, you were always punching above your weight with me. My friends said so from the beginning." "Your friends? Come on, look at yourself." He gestured vaguely at her. "You're pretty enough in the right lighting, but you're not exactly sophisticated. Not like Penelope Ashford or the Carmichael twins. You don't have the breeding, the education, the connections." Each word landed like a punch. "I was willing to overlook that because you were sweet and uncomplicated. But this is manipulative." Tears burned hot behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I didn't trap you. I didn't plan this. I thought you loved me." "Love?" Another hollow laugh. "I cared about you, sure. But love requires equals, Veronica. And we were never equals." The office walls pressed in. Everything she'd believed about their relationship, about Griffin's devotion, about her own worth, all of it crumbled. "So what happens now?" Griffin returned to his desk and pulled out his checkbook. The sound of pen scratching paper filled the silence. He tore the check free with a sharp rip. $50,000. He held it between 2 fingers. "That should cover whatever you decide to do. Get rid of the problem, keep the problem, I don't really care. But we're done. The engagement is off. Veronica stared at the check. Part of her wanted to rip it into pieces and throw them in his face. But another part, the practical part forged by years of working multiple jobs to pay for school, whispered about doctor's appointments and diapers and survival. Veronica took the check. "Smart girl," Griffin said, already reaching for his phone. "See yourself out. I'm sure you remember the way." She walked through those polished corridors one last time. The assistant who'd smiled at her minutes ago now avoided eye contact. By end of day, everyone at Caldwell Industries would know. By end of week, Griffin would probably be photographed with Penelope Ashford. Veronica made it to her car before the tears came, wrenching sobs that left her gasping. But beneath the grief and humiliation, something else stirred. Something hard and unbreakable. Her babies deserved better than a father who viewed them as problems to be solved with money. And she deserved better than a man who measured her worth by pedigree. Veronica sat in her car for 20 minutes after leaving Griffin's office, hands shaking so badly she couldn't turn the key. The check sat on the passenger seat. $50,000. Guilt money. Money that said go away quietly. She wanted to burn it. Instead, she thought about doctor's appointments she couldn't afford. Maternity clothes. Baby furniture for two. The final semester of design school she still needed to finish. Pride was expensive. Survival was practical. Veronica deposited the check the next day. She finished her last semester carrying twins who kicked against her ribs during late-night study sessions. Her professors noticed but asked no questions when she turned in her final projects early. By June, she could barely fit behind her desk, but she walked across that graduation stage with her head high, academic gown billowing over her growing belly. Her mother sobbed in the audience, proud, terrified, and fiercely supportive in ways Veronica was only beginning to understand. Janet Palmer worked rotating shifts as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial, which meant her help came in unpredictable bursts between 12-hour workdays. But she showed up. Always. The twins arrived on a sweltering July night when the hospital air conditioning couldn't quite keep up with the heat wave gripping Chicago. Brooke came first at 11:43 p.m., screaming her arrival with impressive volume for someone who weighed barely 5 pounds. 10 minutes later, Carson followed, quieter but no less determined, his tiny fingers already curling around the doctor's gloved hand. In the dim hospital lighting, exhausted and overwhelmed, Veronica held both babies against her chest and made silent promises. They would never feel unwanted. They would never question their worth. They would grow up knowing their mother chose them over everything, including the man who couldn't see their value. The first year nearly broke her. Childcare for twins cost more than she could manage, so she worked from home, designing logos and basic websites for small businesses, while the babies napped on increasingly chaotic schedules. Sleep became something she remembered fondly rather than experienced regularly. Coffee became breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. Her mother helped between shifts, showing up at 2 a.m. after night rotations to hold a screaming baby, while Veronica finally collapsed for 3 hours of unconsciousness. Friends from design school drifted away when she couldn't make evening meetups anymore. Her social life consisted of pediatrician appointments and late-night client emails typed one-handed while nursing. But somewhere between the exhaustion and isolation, Veronica discovered something remarkable. She was stronger than she'd ever imagined. One freelance client recommended her to another, then another. Small projects became bigger ones. Local businesses became national brands looking for fresh design perspectives. By the twins' second birthday, Veronica launched Palmer Design Collective, a boutique firm specializing in brand identity for women-owned businesses. By their third, she'd hired 2 employees and moved into a small office space in River North. And by their 4th birthday, everything changed. A man named Preston Whitfield walked through her door. Year one with twins was a masterclass in survival. Brooke refused to sleep unless Carson was asleep first. Carson refused to sleep unless he was being held. Between the two of them, Veronica averaged 3 hours of rest per night, never consecutive, always interrupted by crying or feeding or diaper changes that seemed to multiply exponentially. Daycare for 2 infants cost $1,700 monthly. Rent was $1,200. Groceries, utilities, diapers. The numbers didn't add up. So Veronica worked from home, laptop balanced on her knees while babies napped in increasingly unpredictable patterns. Her first client was a local bakery that needed a logo redesign. She charged $300 and delivered it during a rare 2-hour window when both twins slept simultaneously. The baker loved it, referred her to his sister who owned a yoga studio, and suddenly Veronica had 2 clients. Her mother became her lifeline. Janet would finish a 12-hour nursing shift at Northwestern Memorial and drive straight to Veronica's apartment, arriving at 2 a.m. to rock a screaming baby while Veronica finally collapsed into bed. No complaints, just love expressed through action. Mama was Brooke's first word at 14 months. Carson followed 2 weeks later with juice, which became his solution to every problem. The work kept coming. A women's health clinic needed a website. A nonprofit wanted branding materials. A local boutique hired her to redesign their entire visual identity. Each project led to another through word-of-mouth referrals that built slowly but steadily. On the twins' 2nd birthday, Veronica officially registered Palmer Design Collective. The name felt ambitious for a one-woman operation run from a dining room table covered in crayon drawings and half-eaten graham crackers. But it was hers, built on late nights and sheer determination and the refusal to let Griffin's words define her ceiling. A turning point came 6 months later when she pitched a sustainable fashion startup founded by 3 women in their 20s. Veronica showed up to the meeting with her portfolio, her vision, and unfortunately, spit up on her shoulder that she didn't notice until halfway through her presentation. She got the contract anyway. "You're exactly who we want representing our brand," the founder told her. "Someone real, someone who understands juggling impossible demands and still showing up excellent." That project, a complete brand overhaul from logo to packaging to website, became her first 5-figure contract. The portfolio piece opened doors to bigger clients with actual budgets. By the twins' 3rd birthday, Veronica hired her first employee, Pamela, a recent design school graduate who needed experience and didn't mind working for a boss whose office included a play corner with building blocks. 3 months later, she hired her second, a web developer named James who specialized in e-commerce platforms. The dining room table operation moved into actual office space in River North, modest but professional, with room to grow. Veronica hung her degree on the wall beside the twins' finger paintings. Both represented accomplishments she'd earned through grit. Her client roster expanded beyond small businesses. Mid-sized companies noticed her work. A regional bank hired her for their rebrand. A tech startup in the education space brought her on to develop their entire visual identity from scratch. She started turning down projects, an incredible position after years of scraping for every opportunity. By the twins' 4th birthday, Palmer Design Collective employed 6 people and occupied 1,500 square feet of prime office space. Revenue projections for the year looked strong. Veronica's reputation in Chicago's design community had shifted from promising newcomer to go-to expert for authentic brand storytelling. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in early September, a man walked into her office without an appointment. He stood 6'3" with silver threading through dark hair, wearing confidence like a custom suit. His presence filled the reception area, not aggressive, but undeniably magnetic. "Preston Whitfield," he said, extending his hand. "I hope you have time to talk about a project." Veronica had no idea that conversation would change everything. Preston Whitfield wasn't just wealthy, he was Forbes list, private jet, reshape entire industries wealthy. At 42, his venture capital firm, Whitfield Capital Group, had backed some of Silicon Valley's most successful startups before most investors even knew they existed. His $3.7 billion net worth came from recognizing potential others missed and betting early on breakthrough technologies. He'd heard about Veronica's work from a portfolio company's CEO who couldn't stop praising her rebrand. She doesn't just design logos, the CEO had told him. She understands story. She gets what makes brands authentic. That Tuesday afternoon consultation was supposed to last 30 minutes. They talked for 3 hours. Preston asked thoughtful questions about her process, her vision, her philosophy on brand identity. He didn't mention his net worth or his properties or the companies he'd built. He listened more than he spoke, a rarity among successful men Veronica had encountered. Coffee meetings followed, then dinners at restaurants where the chef came to the table personally, then weekend trips to his lakefront estate in Door County, where the twins learned to fish off a private dock while Preston's helicopter sat parked near the boathouse. What struck Veronica most wasn't Preston's wealth, though it was staggering and undeniable. It was how he treated Brooke and Carson. He attended their preschool concerts, squeezed between board meetings. He helped construct elaborate Halloween costumes despite owning homes on 3 continents. He taught Carson to tie his shoes and praised Brooke's drawings with genuine enthusiasm. He never once made Veronica feel like her children were complications to be managed. His previous relationships had graced Society magazine covers, models, actresses, entrepreneurs with Wikipedia pages. But Preston loved Veronica, not despite her past, but including it. Every late-night feeding, every scraped knee, every hard-won victory that had shaped who she'd become. "You built something exceptional," he told her one evening. "Your business, your children, your life. You didn't wait for permission or rescue, you just did it." 6 months into their relationship, Preston took all 3 of them to a Michigan beach at sunset. Veronica thought it was just another weekend getaway until Brooke and Carson ran ahead holding handmade signs. "Will," Brooke held hers high. "You," Carson waved his enthusiastically. Preston dropped to one knee in the sand, pulling out a velvet box. "Marry us?" The ring was a 12-carat custom creation, ethically sourced, designed specifically for her because Preston said nothing ready-made seemed worthy enough. The diamond caught the fading sunlight, throwing rainbows across the beach. "I want to spend my life choosing you," Preston said, "and them. Every day, every challenge, every celebration. I want us to be a family, not because we have to be, but because we choose to be." Veronica said yes before he finished speaking. Brooke and Carson jumped and screamed, crashing into both adults with the force of small hurricanes. They stood there in the sand, 4 people who'd found each other through unexpected paths, and Veronica finally understood what partnership actually meant. Not someone who tolerated her children, but someone who celebrated them. Not someone who measured her worth by connections, but someone who saw her value inherently. Now this is what real love looks like, but wait until you hear what Veronica does next. Drop a heart if you believe in second chances and finding someone who chooses all of you. Because Veronica's about to make a move that will leave her ex absolutely speechless. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear this story. Trust me, you'll want to. This was the man she would marry, and Griffin Caldwell would be there to witness it. 3 weeks before the wedding, Veronica sat in her office reviewing the guest list one final time. 400 names filled the spreadsheet. Preston's business associates from Silicon Valley and Wall Street, tech founders whose companies he'd backed, her design clients, family members, friends who'd carried her through the hardest years. Her cursor hovered at the bottom of the list. One name missing. She typed slowly, Griffin Caldwell. Wait! Pamela's voice cut through the quiet office. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide. Is that my ex-fiancé? Veronica confirmed without looking up. The twins' biological father. Pamela crossed the room in 3 quick steps. Why would you invite him? After everything he did? Veronica leaned back in her chair, considering the name on the screen. Because I want him to see what he walked away from. I want him to witness exactly who I became after he told me I wasn't sophisticated enough for his world. Some things deserve to be witnessed. The invitation went out the next day. Cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, heavy and expensive, the kind Preston's family had used for generations. Veronica ran her fingers across the embossed text before sealing Griffin's envelope. Preston Whitfield and Veronica Palmer request the pleasure of your company. At the celebration of their marriage, she tracked its delivery through USPS, confirmed it arrived at Griffin's Lake Forest address on a Tuesday afternoon. Then she waited. 5 days passed. Then 7. Veronica wondered if he'd ignore it completely, if the cowardice that made him abandon his pregnant fiancée would keep him from facing her again. On the 8th day, the RSVP card arrived in her office mail. Pamela brought it to her desk, eyebrows raised. It's here. Veronica opened the envelope carefully. Griffin's handwriting, familiar, precise, marked the card in blue ink. Accepts with pleasure. Number attending 2. He was bringing someone. Are you okay? Pamela asked. Veronica smiled, not vindictive, just certain. I'm perfect. He's going to walk into the Lyric Opera House and see me marry a man worth $3.7 billion. He's going to meet Brooke and Carson and realize they're brilliant, beautiful children he chose not to know. He's going to spend an entire evening surrounded by evidence of everything I built without him. She filed the RSVP card in her wedding binder, closing it with quiet finality. Let him come, Veronica said. Let him see exactly what not sophisticated enough looks like now. The wedding was 3 weeks away. Griffin Caldwell would attend, and Veronica Palmer was ready. The morning of late October arrived with the kind of sunshine that felt like a blessing. Chicago's skyline gleamed under cloudless skies as the Lyric Opera House prepared to host 400 guests for what would become the wedding of the season. Veronica stood in the bridal suite, surrounded by her closest friends and her mother, wearing a custom gown that had required 5 fittings to perfect. Ivory silk flowed from her shoulders to the floor, hand-embroidered with delicate details that caught the light with every breath. The dress cost what Griffin's annual salary used to be. She'd paid for it herself, though Preston had insisted on covering it as an early wedding gift. You look like royalty, her mother whispered, tears already streaming down her face. Brooke and Carson stood beside their mother in matching navy suits tailored on Savile Row. Nearly 6 years old now, they fidgeted with excitement about their roles as flower girl and ring bearer. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 months earlier. They legally carried Preston's last name now. More than that, Preston had established trust funds worth $20 million each for both children, ensuring their futures would be secure no matter what happened. Ready, Mama? Brooke asked, adjusting the flowers in her hair. More than ready, Veronica replied. The Artist Kranick Theater seated 400 guests beneath soaring ceilings and ornate architectural details. Art Nouveau and Art Deco designs merged in the space. Crystal chandeliers, gold leaf molding, balconies wrapping around 3 sides of the grand venue. It was public, prestigious, and nothing like the private estate wedding Griffin had planned all those years ago. Veronica wanted everyone to see this. The processional music began. Brooke scattered rose petals down the aisle with theatrical flair. Carson followed carefully, carrying the rings on a velvet pillow, like they were the crown jewels. Then Veronica stepped into view, her hand tucked into her mother's arm. The theater fell silent. She walked slowly, taking in the moment. The guests rising to their feet, the flowers framing the aisle, Preston waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes. Halfway down, her gaze snagged on a familiar face in the third row. Griffin sat ramrod straight, his posture rigid with tension. He'd aged in 5 years, softer around the middle where expensive suits tried to hide it, harder around the eyes where time and regret had carved lines. The blonde woman beside him wore too many diamonds, as if compensating for something missing. For 3 seconds, Veronica's eyes met Griffin's. Time stretched. She watched recognition flood his features. Shock first, then something that looked like devastation. He took in her gown, the venue, the crowd of influential guests, Preston waiting ahead. She watched him realize in real time exactly what he'd thrown away. The blonde leaned close to him, her whisper carrying across the quiet theater. "Is that his ex? The one with the illegitimate children?" Griffin's response came barely audible, but Veronica heard it anyway. "No, that's the biggest mistake I ever made," but Veronica was already looking forward, not back. Her gaze found Preston's, this man who'd chosen her, her children, her entire complicated, beautiful life without hesitation. The man who'd built a $3.7 billion fortune, but still considered marrying her his greatest achievement. She continued down the aisle, each step carrying her further from who she used to be and closer to everything she'd built. The ceremony unfolded perfectly. Preston had insisted they incorporate Brooke and Carson into every element. The twins flanked them during the vows, holding hands with both adults, creating a family tableau that made several guests openly weep. "I promise to choose you every single day," Preston said, his voice steady and sure. "Not because it's easy, but because you're incredible. You and these incredible children are my greatest adventure." Veronica's own vows came from a place of hard-won wisdom. "You showed me what partnership actually means. Not someone who tolerates my past, but someone who celebrates everything that made me who I am. You taught me that real love doesn't require me to be less. It invites me to be more." The officiant pronounced them married. Music swelled through the opera house as guests rose to their feet, applauding. Brooke and Carson jumped and cheered with unfiltered joy, making everyone laugh. Preston kissed his bride while their children danced around them, and for one perfect moment, everything aligned exactly as it should. They processed back up the aisle as a family of 4, Veronica and Preston hand in hand, Brooke and Carson skipping ahead waving at guests they recognized. As they passed the third row, Veronica caught one final glimpse of Griffin. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring down at his hands, shoulders slumped, the picture of a man confronting the cost of his choices. The blonde companion was checking her phone, already bored. Veronica felt no vindictiveness, no triumph over his suffering, just a quiet certainty that she'd never needed his validation in the first place. She'd invited him to witness her victory. He'd attended and seen exactly what not sophisticated enough had built. Now she was done looking back. The reception awaited, and Veronica Palmer Whitfield had a marriage to celebrate. The grand ballroom glowed with candlelight reflecting off custom china that Preston had commissioned, specifically for the occasion. The 7-figure wedding budget showed in every detail, from the floral arrangements to the string quartet to the 5-course dinner served to 400 guests. Veronica moved through the room greeting people, her hand never leaving Preston's. Fellow billionaires congratulated them both. Tech founders whose companies Preston had funded early wanted to discuss potential design work with Veronica. Investment partners and philanthropists mingled with her design clients, creating connections she'd only dreamed about 5 years ago. Her firm had hit $8 million in revenue this year. Chicago Magazine had named her to their 40 under 40 list 3 months earlier. She'd been invited to speak at design conferences across the country. This success was hers, built from nothing, earned through late nights and unwavering determination. Halfway through dinner, Griffin approached their table. The blonde companion was nowhere to be seen. He walked alone, hands shoved in his pockets, that same nervous gesture from their past. But everything else about him had changed. Where he'd once carried himself with arrogant confidence, now he seemed diminished. "Veronica," he cleared his throat. "Congratulations. Really, you look incredible. Everything looks incredible." "Thank you for coming," she replied with genuine politeness. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." Griffin glanced around the opulent ballroom, taking in details that screamed wealth beyond his comprehension. "This is quite a setup. Your husband must be—" "Well, I looked him up. $3.7 billion. That's astounding." Preston extended his hand before Veronica could respond. "Preston Whitfield. Pleasure to meet you." Griffin shook it, clearly uncomfortable. "Griffin Caldwell." "Ah." Preston's expression revealed nothing, but his arms settled protectively around Veronica's shoulders. "I've heard about you." An awkward silence stretched between them. "My firm hit $8 million this year," Veronica said, her voice steady. "Preston's proud of me, but this success is mine. I built it from the ground up." Griffin flinched at that. "I heard you'd started a business. Didn't realize it was so successful." "No, you wouldn't have," Veronica said without malice. "You made it clear I wasn't sophisticated enough to achieve anything noteworthy." Before Griffin could respond, Brooke and Carson came running up to the table, their faces flushed from dancing. "Mama! Mr. Preston says we can have cake now," Brooke announced, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mr. Preston is very wise," Veronica laughed, smoothing Carson's collar. "Go find Grandma and tell her it's cake time." The twins dashed off, leaving Griffin staring after them with an expression that looked like physical pain. "They're beautiful," he said quietly. "How old are they now?" "Almost 6, Veronica replied, watching her children with uncomplicated love. "They're smart, kind, funny, creative, everything I hoped they'd be." "I'm sorry." The words burst from Griffin suddenly, urgently. "For what I said that day in my office. For how I treated you. For the check. For all of it. I was scared and stupid and so concerned about what my parents thought, what society thought, that I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Veronica studied him, this man who'd once held her heart and her future before throwing both away. She felt no anger now, no lingering pain, just a distant sadness for who he could have been. "Thank you for saying that," she said simply. "But I need you to understand something, Griffin. You didn't destroy me. You freed me. I wouldn't have built my business if I'd married you. I wouldn't have learned my own strength. I wouldn't have met Preston or discovered what real partnership looks like. Your rejection was the greatest gift you could have given me." Griffin's face crumpled. "Still, those kids, our kids, they're growing up without a father because I was too much of a coward." "They have a father," Veronica corrected firmly, nodding toward Preston, who was spinning Brooke across the dance floor while Carson counted steps. "They have a man who chose them, who loves them, who shows up every single day. Biology doesn't make you a parent. Showing up does." She stood, smoothing her wedding dress. "I invited you here not to hurt you, Griffin. I invited you so you could see that your judgment of me was wrong. I am sophisticated. I am brilliant. I do have breeding, the kind earned through surviving and thriving and refusing to let someone else's limited vision define my worth." Veronica walked away from Griffin Caldwell one final time, leaving him alone amid the celebration of everything she'd built without him. Veronica returned to the dance floor where Preston and the twins waited. Her real family, the people who'd chosen her, who celebrated her, who showed up. Across the ballroom, Griffin gathered his coat. The blonde companion trailed behind him, checking her phone with obvious boredom. They left before the cake was even cut. Griffin's shoulders slumped, his exit quiet and unremarkable. Someone mentioned later that he'd sat in his car in the parking garage for over an hour, just staring at the steering wheel. But Veronica didn't dwell on it. His grief wasn't her concern anymore. The next morning, Chicago woke to another beautiful October day. Before their afternoon flight to Tuscany, the newly expanded family took one last trip to Navy Pier for ice cream, a tradition Veronica had started with the twins when they were toddlers. Brooke ordered chocolate chip in a waffle cone. Carson chose mint with rainbow sprinkles. They ran ahead toward the Ferris wheel, their laughter carrying back on the lake breeze while Veronica and Preston followed hand in hand. "No regrets about the wedding?" Preston asked, kissing her temple. Veronica thought about the question. She thought about Griffin's apology in the 5 years between that devastating office conversation and this perfect morning. She thought about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep while pregnant, the exhaustion of raising twins alone, the slow climb from survival to success. She thought about her business. 23 employees now, $8 million in annual revenue, projects booked 6 months out. She thought about Brooke and Carson, thriving in private school with trust funds that guaranteed their futures regardless of what happened. She thought about Preston, this man who'd built a $3.7 billion fortune but still considered marrying her his greatest achievement. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it completely. 5 years earlier, Griffin Caldwell had looked at Veronica Palmer and found her lacking. He'd measured her worth by pedigree and connections, by borrowed gowns and borrowed confidence, and declared her insufficient for his world. But standing in the October sunshine with her billionaire husband beside her and her children running ahead, Veronica knew the truth. She had never been insufficient. He had simply been blind. Griffin's view would remain perpetually from the outside now, forever watching what could have been his if he'd only had the wisdom to see what stood right in front of him. He'd spend the rest of his life knowing he'd walked away from the woman who became everything, who built an empire from his rejection, who turned his cruelty into fuel for her transformation. But Veronica wasn't performing for that audience anymore. She was too busy living a life beyond even her wildest dreams, not in spite of Griffin's rejection, but because of it. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply becoming so brilliantly, undeniably yourself that the person who dismissed you can only stand on the sidelines and watch. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. You are not defined by who rejected you. You're defined by who you become after. Comment freedom if you believe the best revenge is becoming so brilliantly yourself that the person who dismissed you can only watch from the sidelines. Subscribe to the Penthouse Diaries for more stories of transformation, resilience, and love that doesn't require you to shrink. Hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. That afternoon, they flew to Tuscany, to Preston's restored 16th century villa nestled in rolling hills where olive trees grew and time moved differently. A honeymoon, a new beginning, a future written entirely on their own terms.